Up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the Senate. I will be brief. As I stated yesterday that I was going to come back today and just share with you again some information concerning hate crimes. And I want to,
Senate, please be in order.
I want to reiterate what I said yesterday, that my goal is not to be confrontational or hostile on this, but honestly, I hope I can convince and persuade. There was a question asked of me that says, what does Wyoming and South Carolina have in common? And I didn't think much of it until they said that they understand that there is a national news media outlet that is looking at the state of Wyoming and the state of South Carolina, and they're perhaps working on what do these two states have in common, that they're the only two states in the country without a hate crimes bill. So I've put together for you, and I've passed it out earlier, just data that I want you to consider. And when you look at it on its surface, it appears as if the state of Wyoming and the state of South Carolina have very little in common, such as total population of South Carolina, Senator from Charleston, over 5 million. In fact, 5.372 million. Total population of the state of Wyoming, 583,279. The white population in South Carolina, 66%. The white population in Wyoming is 90%. This is perhaps where the real glaring difference, and perhaps where the national media is going to focus their attention on. The African American population in South Carolina, 26.4%. The African American population in the state of Wyoming, I want to reiterate that again, 0.87%. Then there are other stats that I will not share. But there's one thing that comes to mind, and again, I think that we're going to have a lot of discussion about this across the country. Perhaps the one thing that they do have in common is this, that Wyoming has the dubious reputation of having what was perhaps the most atrocious hate crime dealing with sexual identity in the history of this country. And I shared with you yesterday, Matthew Shepard on October the 6th, 1998, he died, or he was found October 12th, 1998. I don't want to rehash that. You can read the article.
Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you rise, sir?
The Senator reached a breaking point. I'd like to ask him some questions if you yield, but I'll
Yeah,
wait.
I have one other stat that then I will be glad to hear.
Refuses it this time.
And so Wyoming, perhaps the most atrocious hate crime dealing with sexual identity, Matthew Shepard, 1998. And South Carolina, June the 17th, 2015, Mother Emanuel. What is probably the most atrocious hate crime in the history of this country that was done on June 17th, 2015, which our dear colleague, Senator Clementa Pinckney, and 8 others lost their lives. Those are the only things that seem to tie us together, with the exception of one other thing. Neither state has a hate crimes. Wyoming or South Carolina. And I'm sure over the next several months there will be a lot of discussions about that. Again, my goal is that I hope I can convince and persuade us to just have a vote on it. That's all. Just a vote. And I'll promise you, if we vote on it, and if I am not successful, and if we're not successful, I would take my seat and begin working on other issues. Thank you, Senator from
Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you rise, sir?
If the senator would yield.
Senator, yield for questions?
Yes.
Senator yields for questions.
Senator, did you know that I appreciate your leadership on this, and I think maybe now for 5 straight years I've been a co-sponsor on a bill with you. And did you know that I think that this particular matter suffers from a misnaming, that we're talking about a hate crime, and the opponents talk about you're criminalizing thought. But did you know, Senator, that what it actually is, you have to commit an existing crime,
right.
And then after being convicted of an existing crime, if there is a second hearing and a judge finds evidence that it was racially or motivated by hatred in the ways defined, that it serves as a sentence enhancement. Were you familiar with that?
Yes.
And did you know we already have in the code, we already have in the South Carolina Code, this very thing. It's called aggravating circumstances, where if you commit a crime, if you commit a murder, you commit an assault or a robbery, and then it has some other elements to it that have to do with the person's, intentions or motives, that we instruct the judges to take those things into consideration in deciding what sentences to impose. Did you know that we already have that in the code?
Yes, Senator.
And did you know, as a matter of fact, that if we passed a hate crimes bill, we would be saying to the judge, these are also aggravating circumstances that you can consider for purposes of imposing a sentence if these things obtain. Did you know that?
Yes, Senator.
And did you know that I don't understand why there are members in the Senate okay with certain aggravating circumstances being listed in there, but don't want to have listed in there something that you recited about that young man who was killed in Wyoming?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that not all murders are equally heinous? Would you agree with me that some murders, for instance, if somebody broke into my home and I acted unreasonably and I killed them, I could be charged with murder?
Sure.
Would you agree that act of murder is different than what happened to that young man in Wyoming who was tied up to a fence post and beat to death?
Yes, I would definitely
Senator,
agree.
I will stand with you as you push for this. Thank you.
Senator, and I would tell you, and I hope you guys save the article about Matthew Shepard. Because as I said on yesterday, nothing moved me and literally changed my opinion on an issue as the Matthew Shepard situation did. And I think and I do understand, and I can respect members of this body saying I'm against a piece of legislation because it will harm South Carolina or because it's bad for my district. Here are the negative connotations. Here are the negative impacts. If we pass this bill, then these things could happen that would make us a worse state. Not one person, not one individual
Senator,
has said to any of us that is the case.
Unanimous consent request?
State your request.
For 1 additional minute so I can ask him 2 or 3 more questions.
In 1 minute?
About 5
1
minutes.
Two.
I'm good with 1.
Two.
I mean,
okay, 1. Is there objection to 1 minute? Hearing no objection. So ordered.
Senator, yes.
Senator from Beaufort, do you?
Senator, yield.
Senator from Richland, do you?
Yes.
Yield for questions.
Yes,
Senator yields.
I will.
Senator, on theories of justice, did you understand? Do you know that one of the reasons for justice in a criminal code is for deterrence, is to deter behavior and to deter, future acts? And in another sense, is retributive justice, to pay your debts to society.
Right.
But did you also know that the criminal code is a way that society reflects what its values are? A way in which a society reflects and says what it considers to be particularly heinous. Okay, that is a theory of justice and a reason for a criminal code. And did you know that our criminal code is absent and says something about us when it does not have, as an aggravating circumstance, something that is motivated by this young man in Wyoming? Our code does not contain that, and that says something about us as a state that it does not.
Yes, thanks. And I want to leave you with this. On tomorrow, I will share with you one of the most iconic quotes that any of us have heard. It was used particularly after World War II, and as a result, when people were asked, why didn't someone stop Adolf Hitler? I'll do that tomorrow. But here's the last difference. The state of Wyoming has 93 members of its General Assembly, 93. Out of those 93, only 1 is an African American. So it's not a diverse state. Out of 93 members of the General Assembly in Wyoming, only 1 who's an African American senator stands as an African American in Wyoming. Perhaps there aren't those in Wyoming that would do as we've done and try our best to convince us to do something that poses absolutely no danger or no harm to South Carolina. Thank you, members. Look forward to sharing with you again on tomorrow.
Thank you, Senator from Richland.